I worked with Simcoe County for my internship this summer. And today we'll be talking about assessing land acquisition strategies for Simcoe County forests through a review of land securement strategies in Ontario. So Simcoe County is a municipality located in central Ontario, north of Peel and York, south of Muskoka. It's one of the largest and one of the most productive municipal forests in Ontario, spanning over 13,000 hectares and 150 forest tracts. So on the left there, you can see the forest tracts in dark green. It's not an insubstantial amount of land base. It's actually quite a bit, and just interesting to note that a large portion of it is in the northern part of the county. The forests are heavily utilized for recreational use by residents of the county, which includes a variety of pursuits such as hiking, dirt biking, equestrian, cross-country skiing, hunting, among others. As mentioned, Simcoe County is one of the most productive municipal forests in the province, which means it's a working forest and sustainable timber harvesting does occur, with the largest working group being red pine. And in 1980, I believe, the revenue from timber sales in Simcoe County actually exceeded expenses, allowing the county to reinvest for future acquisition of land, with a forest reserve fund existing for revenues generated by Simcoe County forests. So just to give some historical context for acquisitions that occurred. So during settlement of the province, land was cleared for agricultural use, and a lot of erosion occurred, leading to desertification and subsequent abandonment of this land. This is just an example of the desert-like conditions that were seen across Ontario. This was in Ontario County, taken by E.J. Zavitz, who was a young forester at the time. He conducted a survey of some of the severely affected lands in the province, with some of them being in Anton Mills and the Angus area of Simcoe County. So in the early 1920s, he partnered up with E.C. Drury, who was Premier of Ontario at the time and from Simcoe County, to develop the Agreement Forest Program. And essentially, this program existed for the county to acquire land, and then the province would go on to manage forestry activities and reforestation. And Simcoe County was actually the first county to enter into the Agreement Forest Program in 1922, kind of setting the precedent for the rest of the province. So as mentioned, red pine is the largest working group, and this was selected for plantations due to its suitability in these sandy soils. So this is just an example, kind of a progression of some of the plantations. This was in the Hendry Tract in 1922. It follows Patrick Kearns at 6 weeks old, and later at 16, and finally at 60 in 1982. So it just kind of shows a nice progression of the growth of those plantations. So why is Simcoe County looking at land acquisition? So the current acquisition principles are based on the Municipal Act, and this basically states that the municipality will protect and enhance tree canopy and natural vegetation within the county. It's also based on the 1996 acquisition principles and reforestation reserve, which essentially prioritized acquisition of land for quality forestry purposes, consolidation of existing tracts, enlargement of existing tracts, and contribution to natural heritage values. So I think these documents have been pretty successful in guiding the county to acquire land so far, but these documents are nearly 25 years old now, and an updated policy on land securement efforts kind of warrants review. So these are kind of some of the main drivers for land acquisition in the county, or some of the main reasons. The first being the protection and enhancement of natural heritage values. So protection and enhancement of these features is mandated by the Municipal Act, and in light of increasing urbanization and development pressures in Simcoe County, specifically in the southern portion, identifying and securing lands and areas of natural and scientific interest, provincially significant wetlands, and high conservation value forests provides a guarantee of protection and securement of these features. Next being mitigating the variable age class structure in red pine. So as mentioned, red pine is the largest working group in Simcoe County forests. It's the most significant in terms of revenue, area, and productivity. However, tree planting volumes dropped off in the 1970s, leaving a gap in age class distribution. So currently many red pine plantation are near the end of their rotation age. And this issue is further compounded by the shade intolerance of the species and the armillaria root rot found in most plantations. So while acquisition of younger red pine plantations wouldn't completely solve the gap in the age classes, it could help smooth the transition from plantation to naturally occurring mixed wood forests in terms of wood flow. The last point I wanted to highlight is that Simcoe County is projected to see an increase in population from over 500,000 to 740,000 in 2046. This is a 38.6% increase, which is actually above the projected population increase for the province of 33%. So to accommodate the growing population and meet the needs for residents and tourists in Simcoe County alike, the municipality should be interested in expanding green spaces for multi-use recreation. So I wanted to see what we could learn about priorities or strategies from other organizations and use their input to inform the acquisition process. So this was done by looking at similar municipalities in Ontario and conservation organizations within Simcoe County. So I did a review of forest management plans, operating procedures, and other available documentation that these organizations had on acquisition priorities. I selected municipalities based on their proximity to Simcoe County, their prior participation in the Agreement Forest Program, and available acquisition information. So it's essentially a qualitative and comparative analysis of priorities mentioned by each municipality, which was then distilled into more broad categories. So these were the selected municipalities for comparison. On the right, you can just see kind of a summary of their land holdings, with Simcoe County being the largest with over 13,000 hectares. Many of these municipalities are rural, though I left York Region in because it is highly urbanized and is facing similar development pressures. So it'd be interesting kind of to see what their priorities were. It's also important to note that Simcoe County has acquisition of land factored into their budget, while this may not necessarily be true for other municipalities. So it should be mentioned that cost will always be a factor when looking to acquire land. So this just shows the broad categories of priorities that were specifically mentioned by municipalities that I can identify in forest management plans and other documentation. And essentially the x-axis there just shows the number of municipalities that kind of highlighted this priority, with the biggest three being the protection of natural heritage features, connectivity between existing tracks, and recreational use. So natural heritage was identified by most of them, probably not a surprising result there, because the protection and enhancement of natural heritage features such as ANSIs, PSWs, and other ecologically significant characteristics was highlighted, kind of in line with Simcoe County's current commitment to the protection and enhancement of natural heritage features. Connectivity was the second most frequently identified priority. So this was identified for ecological purposes such as wildlife connectivity and for natural processes, adjustment and correction of boundaries, as well as reducing maintenance time and cost for staff. The third most frequently identified priority was recreation. So this included identifying properties for acquisition that would enhance recreation, such as the expansion of trails or drawing tourists to the area for economic development. I also wanted to look at organizations within the county that were responsible for production and management of land. So this involved the two conservation authorities and a land trust. It's important to note that the objectives of these organizations may not necessarily overlap with those of Simcoe County, but it is important to understand how combined conservation efforts can work in conjunction and work effectively. These land holdings also may not necessarily be 100% owned by these conservation organizations. For example, some of these may be easements. So basically what I found from this review was that these organizations had specific land securement documentation, which provided context on how they went about acquiring land. One of the biggest hurdles for conservation authorities and NGOs being funding. Another thing that they considered when assessing a property was the eligibility for land through the eco-gifts program, which essentially allows landowners to get tax benefits through donation, and the conservation land tax incentive program, which encourages long-term private stewardship of important natural areas. They also place a greater emphasis on the size of the lot, with 10 hectares and 20 hectares being the minimum for the LSRCA and NVCA respectively. And they also did a preemptive scan of apparent ecological features. This was kind of done like in an in-house natural heritage information system, with having the property have to have 3 minimum before they would consider it for acquisition. So now that we know some of the other municipalities and organizations are prioritizing land acquisition and what those priorities are, these are just some recommendations I thought would be useful for Simcoe to consider to meet those priorities. So one of the interesting ones I saw was Dufferin County had a ranking system. So essentially they looked at their tracks on the left there and characteristics of property on the top, and they go into greater detail on how they assigned those values. But this was sort of an objective ranking system that could be used when assessing properties in the future.
A minute, Mark.
The next was acquiring land to mitigate variable red pine age class. Renfrew County was specifically the one that mentioned this. So they talked about acquiring marginal farmland and replanting with red pine or species that are underrepresented in the county. So this is another kind of problem that other counties are facing, specifically Renfrew. And this is similar to the strategy that is recommended or suggested in the Simcoe Forest Management Plan. But I just thought it was important to note that other counties are looking into acquisition of land to mitigate this problem. The third being a forest cover target. Specifically, Prescott Russell and York Region mentioned this. York Region wanting to increase to 35% by 2031, and Prescott wanting to increase from 28%. In Simcoe County, the uplands consist of 51% forest cover, and the lowlands are approximately 27% forested. And being able to increase continuous forest cover is a priority when the land acquisition does occur in Simcoe County. I just thought that maybe developing a forest cover target could be helpful going forward with future acquisition strategies. The last being acquiring land to increase habitat diversity. So York Region specifically mentioned replanting for underrepresented habitat types, specifically oak savanna and tallgrass prairie. This is something that is happening in Simcoe in terms of restoring sites for species at risk, specifically jack pine habitat for Kirtland warbler. So this is something that does occur in Simcoe County. I just thought it was worth mentioning. It may be interesting to acquire land for the reforestation of less common habitat types rather than red pine. So these are just some of the considerations for the county based on interesting priorities that organizations had. While some of these are interesting suggestions, it's important to note that a direct comparison of organizations is kind of difficult. Simcoe County is unique in a lot of the ways that it operates, and what may be a priority for one organization may not be a priority for another.
12-minute mark.
So I just want to say thank you to my supervisor, Anne, for all her help, as well as my external examiner and supervisor at the county, Graeme Davis. I had a lot of fun working there this summer and I learned a ton. I also want to say thank you to my classmates and friends in the MFC program for all their support. And thank you for listening. I will now take questions.
That's great. Thanks very much, Anna. We'll turn to Graeme to initiate the discussion.
There we go. As soon as I can get my mute button off, I'll be all set here. So,
hi, Graeme.
hi, Anna. Nice to see you, and well done.
Thank you.
A couple of quick questions for you. It's funny that I wasn't aware before your paper of the ranking system that Dufferin County has. Did you find anybody else with that sort of a system? I know York Region is a little bit more involved in acquisition as well, but I'm just curious if you found anybody else that actually used that sort of a ranking system in looking at priorities.
I didn't find one, and I imagine if there is one, it maybe wasn't as detailed as Dufferin's. I think I was reading Grey County had mentioned that they wanted to kind of make a acquisition ranking strategy like that, but there was something that they just kind of proposed in their forest management plan and hadn't really followed through with yet. So Dufferin was the only one that I'd found.
Okay. And the other, if you can maybe expand on just looking at from a natural heritage perspective, and perhaps trying to focus effort on some of those underrepresented forest types or ecosystem types like York Region is doing. Mm-hmm. Did you have any sense of any level of success with that type of thing, with looking at perhaps trying to acquire or restore grasslands or savannas or other things like that, in addition to the more traditional forest restoration, which has been practiced for decades through plantations and other means?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, once again, they're pretty vague. I found it in their operating procedure, but it does kind of actually remind me, not York Region, but when I worked for the LSRCA, they had grants available for the restoration of, say, grasslands. So they kind of had like a tree planting fund for people that wanted to do tree planting, but they also had grants available for people that wanted to restore grasslands. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
you. Other questions or comments?
Hi, Patrick, it's Ann. Good
Go ahead,
presentation. Good presentation. Hi, Graham.
How are you, Ann? Nice to
Good.
see
I
you.
like your COVID beard going on. Good presentation, Anna.
Thank you.
One comment I had, and I wondered if you wanted to expand on it, is your work is sort of interesting because Simcoe is so important in this municipal forestry world. And in most other municipalities, there's just an attempt just to protect forest land, to see that it doesn't get pieced off, sold for development, lost somehow. And so having a land acquisition strategy seems to me to be a pretty powerful political statement with respect to forestry and wanting to expand forest land.
Mhm.
Do you have any comments about that?
I guess for me doing this review, to be honest, like it was fairly difficult to find information from other municipalities on any sort of acquisition strategy that they had. I mean, like there were kind of interesting pieces here and there. I don't know. I think it's kind of an opportunity for Simcoe to, I guess, set a precedent once again for an acquisition strategy. And given that, they have more resources to be able to do that and acquire land, I don't know, I think it's pretty interesting in that respect, a bit more unique, I guess.
Thank you.
No, it's very true, and it is a unique scenario, largely because of the economy scale that we've got here, and it's really a case that, in Simcoe, it's really never stopped for 100 years. That's the interesting thing, is that there's been a political support to continued expansion literally for 100 years now, although it's been able to continue for the last decades because the funding is there through the timber revenues. So it has created a unique model.
Yeah, I think it was interesting to note too, looking at the other municipalities, I think some of them mentioned wanting to increase their timber revenue as a priority, but that's not necessarily the reality for a lot of these municipalities, or at least not to the same scale as Simcoe. I think an interesting thing to note as well was kind of the shifting priorities through time in acquisition of land, with the beginning being reforestation, rehabilitation of the land. And then, we're having this revenue from timber harvesting, and then now we're kind of focusing more on the natural heritage aspect.
May I ask, is it necessarily so that for a county forest, that the only way that they can expand their forested land is through timber revenue? So what is that the main hurdle for other jurisdictions not having the same amount of timber revenue? Or, I mean, I imagine there are other issues of willpower or political will, pardon me, that to make that happen.
I don't know, maybe Graeme might be better suited to answer this question, but I would say largely, yeah, cost is a large factor as well. I think in combination with political will.
Yeah, no, you're very right there, and it's a major factor for sure. There are probably the exception there would be York Region, that there is a political commitment to look at acquisition beyond their ability to pay for it with timber revenues. I'm not aware of another municipality like York. They've done a lot through partnerships as well, though. So
that's interesting. Thank you. Other comments or questions from the audience? There are currently.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
For Anna? Okay. Hi, Anna. Here, I'll turn my video on. Can you speak a little bit more to what the Eco Gift program is? Is that something that's unique to the area? I haven't heard of that.
I don't think it's unique to the area. Let me just find my note on this.
Yeah, no problem. Or even Graeme, if he has.
Essentially, okay, so what I have on it is that it allows landowners to get a tax benefit through donation of the land. But one of the qualifiers being that the land has to be ecologically sensitive. So I think someone has to actually assess the land for having particular ecological features. for it to
Right,
be.
so something like unique.
Yeah,
Right, got it. Okay, cool. Right on. Thanks.
you're welcome.
We have time for another question or two. Don't be shy. I'm sure you have many burning questions about how this works, and Anna is ready to answer them.
I have a question.
Please go ahead.
Do you think there are ways in which, so like you were saying that Simcoe is powerful because they have a lot of revenue from all their great forests. Do you think there are other ways in which their money can be spent as opposed to land acquisition that might be beneficial to their priorities or management strategies?
Well, I would say, you know, not all of the money is solely funneled into acquiring properties. There's also like the management and tending of those properties. So like a lot of the work that I did this summer was invasive species management. So managing for invasives on these actual properties, or, you know, like tending or pruning in the forest itself could be things that, you know, are contributed to with resources.
Love it. Thank you.
I could maybe just add to that really quickly. That's entirely correct. So, and I think that's one of the reasons Simcoe is unique, because there's been that commitment that all of the revenues that the forest generates get reinvested back into the forest. So the first thing we invest in, of course, is the day-to-day management. So all of our invasive species programs, all of our silviculture is all funded through that, and it's the excess that's available for land acquisition. But again, the political commitment to not utilize those additional funds for other purposes has been a very long-standing commitment, and I think that's one of the real reasons for the ability to continue to grow as well.
I've got a question, if we have time.
Yeah, please go ahead, Jackie.
Yeah, that was a great presentation, Anna. I was wondering if you know anything about the federal government's commitments under the conservation of biodiversity and the opportunities that there might be for creating like protected areas, using funding for protected areas to secure lands. Do you know anything about that?
I feel like I remember Graeme and I kind of talking about this in the summer, maybe, in terms of that might be something that's more of an opportunity for conservation authorities or land trusts, because I feel like there is some contention with actively harvesting on land and it also being considered protected area. And maybe those two being exclusive from one another. So maybe, you know, if there is going to be harvesting on a particular parcel, then it wouldn't be eligible for those sorts of federal programs.
It's a good memory, Anna. You're exactly correct there.
It was something like that we talked about.
Interestingly, I've got a meeting this afternoon with Ontario Nature and having that very conversation about.
That goes well.
Yeah. But management has been considered mutually exclusive from the protection of our land base, which frankly is something as a forester I take great exception to. But that's the current standard for these protected areas that Canada is trying to secure at the national level.
That's very interesting. That's great. Thank you very much, Graeme. Thank you, Anna. Great presentation, great discussion. We're going to move on to